count of three. Try it again. Get ready. From the beginning of that sentence, get ready.
She played with her goat in her house.
Go on.
She played with her goat in her yard.
Good job. Go on.
Mr. President, are you aware of the reports of the plane crash in New York? Is there anything?
Talk about it later.
Thank you all. You can step out the door we came in.
Cooperation between nations to deal with this.
They would have had confirmations, United Airlines, that its flights,
They set the date for this before they knew the plane was going.
I'm going to turn right now back to my colleague in New York, Aaron Grant.
And to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Pretty good. Nice to meet you.
Okay, class, this is Trevor, and he works in television, and he is going to talk to us today, okay?
Okay.
Hi, how's everyone doing? High five. Oh, there we go. I work in television on a comedy show. Does anybody here want to work in television when they grow up? Okay, okay. Who likes comedy? Who's the class clown?
Joey!
Joey? Joey's the class clown?
I saw Sarah at recess, and this is what her face looks like.
Okay, all right.
I want to be an astronaut.
Oh, you want to be an astronaut? Well, that's great. You can be an astronaut. All you have to do is study flying or science, and maybe someday you could be the first astronaut to walk on the moon.
No! There already was an astronaut who first walked on the moon.
Well, no, not really. That wasn't real. See, there was this thing called the Cold War, and in order to beat the Russians, we kind of faked that. That never happened. See how there's no windows on the side? And see underneath where there's like a pod thing? What's that, right? Take a look at this wreckage. See how there's no plane parts on the ground there? What does that look like?
A missile.
You see, President Bush was in a secret society at Yale called the Skull and Bones. His dad was too, and they all worship Satan.
President Bush worshipped Satan?
In my personal opinion, absolutely. And one of the Skull and Bones initiation rituals is that to get in, you have to lie naked in a coffin and masturbate in front of the older members. But the really messed up thing is that since former President Bush, Bush Sr., was also a member, he requested to be there to watch his son's initiation. So he watched his own son masturbate. President Bush masturbated in front of his dad. Yeah, it's pretty gross.
Viewer discretion is advised as this episode explores controversial and sensitive topics. Please be aware that all information presented is alleged and should be approached with caution. We want to extend our respect and thoughts to our viewers in New York as we remember the tragic events of September 11th, 2001, and its lasting impact on all who were affected. This episode serves as a celebration of awakening and awareness, acknowledging the pivotal moments that have opened our eyes to the truth. In a world filled with complex lies and deceptive narratives, it is crucial to question, analyze, and seek the truth. The events of 2001 were just the beginning, and as we uncover more layers of deception, it becomes clear that participation in these falsehoods only serves to perpetuate them. Let us come together to break free from the chains of manipulation and falsehoods and embrace a future where knowledge and empowerment prevail. Join us as we lift the veil of ignorance and embark on a journey of enlightenment and discovery. Welcome to the show.
Interested in more than just a good... Listen, he's having no trouble.
Could you say it again?
He fella in the white...
On your screen.
Said earlier, Steve, undefeated.
In fact, my friends who have dial-up come to my house.
Good afternoon. Terrorist terror. Terrorism. Terrorist.
We got an issue in America. Too many good docs are getting out of business. Too many OBGYNs aren't able to practice their love with women all across this country.
Terrorists. Terrorism. I don't know all the facts, but I was deeply concerned that this could have been, another organized, highly organized attack on the country. Terrorists and terror.
Our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we. Terrorists.
The FBI tells NBC News it was some distance from Ground Zero that a civilian found a passport lying on the street belonging to one of the suspected hijackers.
Sir, we found the passport belonging to one of the hijackers, blocks away from the attack.
Excellent work, Special Agent. Free the 5 dancers at once. Sir, what if someone just planted the passport there?
Heck! Nonsense, you fool. We must invade the entire Middle East. The indestructible passport is gone. Someone took it.
Who is Passport Man? Did he steal and then reverse engineer the indestructible passport of one of the hijackers? If they made buildings out of passport paper, maybe they'd still be standing. Now I've got to make sure this never gets used the wrong way again.
Tanya Head was just one of 19 people who had been above the point of impact in the South Tower, lived to tell about it. After being badly burned, Tanya witnessed the decapitation of her assistant before coming across a dying man who begged her to deliver his wedding ring to his wife. Her own survival, she said, was made possible by the thoughts of beautiful white dress she would be wearing for her fiancé Dave on their wedding day. Soon after, this woman would learn that Dave, who had been working in the North Tower, didn't make it. Despite that devastating loss, Tanya became a beacon of hope. She lobbied to have survivors invited to annual 9/11 commemorations, have them represented in the 9/11 Museum, even gave Rudy Giuliani, Michael Bloomberg, a tour of Ground Zero. But Tanya, you see, had a very dark secret. She wasn't even in the United States on September 11th. It was all a lie. Robin Fisher and Angelo Guglielmo Jr. wrote about Tanya's extraordinary deception. Their new book is entitled The Woman Who Wasn't There. Angelo, who'd been friends with Tanya, told me about how they first met.
The second we met, she told me her story. I cried, and...
You cried?
Yeah. I mean, and she only had really like 70 seconds to tell me the story. It was just barely a minute. And, you know, we became friends right after that. And then she asked me to do a documentary based on her group.
Robin, to you, I mean, Tanya had really emerged as a very well-known name within the 9/11 survivors community. She wasn't just a survivor. I mean, she was, the president of the Survivors Network. Yeah. What else?
She was everything. She was the ultimate survivor. She was a widow. She was a victim. She was the leader. She was everything on 9/11.
When you hear the details of her story and her fiancé and the ring that she brought to the man after she got out of the South Tower, I mean, did you ever stop and question any of the story and her personality? Describe it.
Well, you know, she had a personality that was not unlike a movie star. It was magnetic. She had a magnetism. She didn't have empirical, like, physical beauty, but what she did have was this light around her that connected you to her immediately. So she was able to walk into a room and just command presence. All eyes were on her. And, I mean, we connected to her right away. And so did the press, so did the people in the 9/11 community. It was very hard because, as Robin said, you know, she represented a widow and a hero and almost everything that 9/11 came to represent.
So never at any point in time you said, Tanya, I'm not so sure about you.
Well, you know, it's a strange thing. You know, she's sitting in front of your camera and you're interviewing her, and you know she's bearing her soul. And not for a second did I believe that she was anything more than an authentic 9/11 survivor. Her story changed. You know, she was a widow. She said she had a fiance, then a husband, then it went back to fiance.
Some holes in the resume.
Sure, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, back to Merrill Lynch, and you just said to yourself, well, she's so traumatized that she can't keep her facts straight, and that was common of a lot of survivors. So, you know, every type of detection you had of her, you overruled because of her trauma.
You talk about interviewing her for the documentary, and she's telling these stories, and you would never think for a second to question that, but who questioned it, who did a little fact-checking, was the New York Times. So this piece comes out, and you come to realize that this good friend, who, you know, I'm sure she bared her soul to you and vice versa, you find out this was all a ruse. Are you in shock? Do you think it's a joke?
Oh, you know, it's hard to believe, and it's hard to wrap your head around at first. You know, you have to keep reminding yourself that she was lying, because ironically, it was the deception that didn't seem real. And then after you sort of come out of that shock, it sort of starts to make sense. The canceled appointments, the disappearances, the inconsistencies in stories and emotions, the emotional outbreaks, you start to say, wow, all that mystery that we couldn't figure out now is adding up.
Did you ever have a chance to see her finally, once this all came out, and say, who are you and why?
Well, you know, against all odds, in a city of 8 million people, I ran into her on the street just days after the 10th anniversary. And the survivors really were still suffering at what she had done. I mean, the shockwaves were through the survivor community for years to come. Wow. And I asked her, how could you come to New York after the 10th anniversary?
How dare you?
Yeah, how dare you? And don't you feel a thing for the people that you've hurt? Because it just boggled my mind that there was no contrition, there was no apology, there was no...
apology?
No.
Not once.
There was no effort to ease their suffering, which they clearly were so doing, you know. So it was incredible.
Who is she and where is she now?
She is, she's a very wealthy woman. Her family's very wealthy, from Barcelona. She travels all over Europe. She goes from Barcelona, she pops into Manhattan, seems to be living the high life. I believe, at least her therapist told me, that if she's not scamming someone right now, she will definitely do it again. And she even fooled her own therapist.
The World Trade Center from the New York City skyline.
Twin Towers, take it, Mean Gene.
All right, thank you, Vince McMahon, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, the lovely Elizabeth. 3 people working as one with one goal in mind: to defeat, or should I say demolish, the Twin Towers.
I felt the pain, and I can still feel the pain right now. And Hulk Hogan, that pain won't stop until the Twin Towers come crumbling down.
Billion.
Well, now that's just insane.
These fucking vultures are trying to pluck my eyes out.
Have you talked to Rudy yet?
Rudy was the one who told me.
That's the price. I mean, what do you want me to say? It's 1.5. It's just what it is.
This is just... When big things move, all parties have to be mutually, you know... Well, it goes without saying, somebody is incredibly miffed you made that deal.
Miffed? My guys told me 150 million tops. If I can't get that shit out of those walls for less than 1.5 billion, I'm fakakta. You understand? I never should have listened to you.
I never told you to buy 2 towers of Babel filled with asbestos. Nothing in New York real estate is that easy. You weren't buying a fucking deli.
I don't have 1.5. I need that shit out of the walls, or I need those buildings gone.
Which I told you is never gonna happen. The demolition will probably cost more than it did to build the fucking thing.
See? Fakakta. At this point, it costs less to get someone to fly fucking planes into the building and collect the insurance.
For that, you'd need terrorism insurance.
I'll call you back. Deborah!
I'm right here, sir.
Oh, I need you to find out what kind of terrorism insurance we've got on those piece of shit towers.
Mr. Vice President, I've got an interesting idea I'd like to propose to you.
Did somebody order a false flag operation?
Get him whatever he wants. I just want him to feel like he's part of the team. Just pull it already.
And then when France doesn't join, we're going to call them freedom fries.
So, I found this fucking passport over there. It's kind of burnt up, but not too bad, considering it came from a fucking plane crash, am I right? And, not for nothing, but I already checked it. And it's a fucking Saudi Arabian guy. It's definitely probably one of the terrorists, you know, because, well, I mean, fucking come on here.
Even enemies need to agree sometimes.
And if you call it the global war on terrorism, I mean terrorism can be anywhere. So now you can fight everywhere. It's gonna be great. So that's the plan so far. Be honest. What do you guys think?
I'll tell you, Dick, Daddy's gonna think this is just so cool, you know? It's like getting the band back together.
It's getting through.
American defense and destroy the Pentagon with one.
19 Islamic terrorists were responsible for the hijackings. No one has ever produced a single image of these alleged terrorists boarding the 4 hijacked airplanes. All major airports in the world have security cameras practically everywhere, covering every public area of the airport 24 hours a day. But the only image of the terrorists released after 9/11 was this shot from a security camera showing alleged hijackers Abdulaziz Al-Omari and Mohammed Atta going through a security checkpoint. The 2 men, however, are not boarding Flight American 11 from Boston to Los Angeles, but a previous connecting flight from Portland, Maine to Boston in the early hours of September 11. Only in 2005 were some images of the terrorists in one of the 3 airports released. They showed the group that allegedly hijacked Flight 77 passing through security checks at Washington Dulles. But the timestamp, which is always embedded in security camera recordings, was either cropped out or absent altogether. This means that the video could have been shot at any time prior to 9/11, possibly during a dry run the terrorists did along the same routes. In fact, the 9/11 Commission has stated that many of the terrorists, including Atta, Sheikhi, Jarrah, Hanjour, Hazmi, took cross-country surveillance flights early in the summer. The phenomenon at Ground Zero are the extremely high temperatures registered under the rubble for many weeks after the collapses. On September 16, NASA shot these thermographic images of Ground Zero, indicating unusually high temperatures at the base of the 3 collapsed buildings. Despite the heavy rains of September 14th, the hotspots registered peak temperatures of more than 1,300 degrees under the rubble. 10 days later, the fires kept burning. For the rescue workers, this became an additional burden on their already gruesome task. On October 8th, the hotspots under the 3 collapsed buildings remained clearly visible. 6 weeks later, as the excavations progressed, the situation seemed only to get worse.
Oh, it's unbelievable. And this is 6 weeks later, almost 6 weeks later. And as we get closer to the center of this, it gets hotter and hotter. It's probably 1,500 degrees. We've had some small windows into what we thought was a core at some point, and it looked like an oven. You know, it was just roaring inside. It was just a bright reddish-orange color.
The consequences of such extreme temperatures were quite visible on the steel that was being extracted from the rubble.
The grapplers were pulling stuff out, big sections of iron that were literally on fire on the other end. They would hit the air and burst into flames.
We would create an air pocket by moving steel, fueling the fires underground. But, you know, these underground fires were just like the fires of hell.
I got there.
Charlie Vichers was a supervisor of removal operations at Ground Zero. From PBS's America Rebuilds page, we read, Vichers' crew picked up 40 to 60 foot long pieces of steel impaled in the pile, where the bottom 20 feet would be glowing red hot. Vichers said, trucks loaded with steel would pass by and you could feel the back of your neck burning standing 20 feet away. In an article called A Dangerous Worksite, the U.S. Department of Labor wrote, underground fires burned at temperatures of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This was confirmed by Mayor Giuliani.
There were fires of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit below the ground.
The Journal of the American Society of Safety Engineers wrote, thermal measurements taken by helicopter each day showed underground temperatures ranging from 400 to more than 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. 8 weeks later, and the fires still had not subsided.
You see how this debris is still smoking? That's when the fire is going to still burning. 8 weeks later, we still got fires burning.
11 weeks later, and the fires kept burning.
As recently as the end of November, it was still 1,100 degrees down underneath the rubble.
As November turned into December, ice was noticed in the mornings above the ground. but the debris underneath was still smoldering. It took until December 19, more than 3 months after the collapses, for the last underground fire to be extinguished. American 11, the plane that hit the first tower, we were told that the cockpit voice recorder was never found. For United 175, the plane that hit the second tower, we were also told that the cockpit voice recorder was never found. For the flight that hit the Pentagon, we were told that the voice recorder was found, but it was damaged to the point that the contents were unusable. This is very curious, as black boxes are built specifically to withstand extremely high temperatures and the most violent of impacts. For United 93, the voice recorder was found, we were told, and was in good condition. But, for unknown reasons, the recording was never made public. In December 2001, members of the victims' families formally asked the FBI to release the voice recordings from the cockpit of Flight 93. But the FBI replied, "While we empathize with the grieving families, we do not believe that the horror captured on the cockpit voice recording will console them in any way." The situation becomes even more implausible if we look at the actual flight data recorders, the devices that store the technical information from the plane during the flight. For the 2 airplanes that hit the towers, again, we are told that the flight data recorders were never found. We're asked to believe that not 1, but 4 bright orange, practically indestructible voice and data recorders eluded a search. For the other 2 flights, the one that hit the Pentagon and the one that crashed in Pennsylvania, the flight data recorders were found, we were told, and were in good condition. These 2 black boxes, however, pose a big problem. Every flight data recorder carries a metal plaque indicating the exact model and serial number of that device. This allows a flight data recorder to always be matched to the plane it was mounted on, while providing some important technical information. As explained by the NTSB, the serial number is used to identify when a recorder manufacturer switched from a certain memory configuration to another. This information is necessary to perform the correct recovery of the data. In virtually every accident report filed by the NTSB in the last 20 years, both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder's serial numbers are listed. But in the reports from Flight 77 and Flight 93, for some reason, they are not. An independent researcher has filed several Freedom of Information Act requests with the NTSB, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the FBI, requesting information on the missing serial numbers, but his requests were always denied. As no one has ever released the serial numbers of the 2 flight data recorders, it's impossible to know whether they came from Flight 77 and Flight 93, or from a totally different source. All in all, we have this paradoxical situation where the contents of 6 black boxes out of 8 were never released, while the other 2 cannot be verified as genuine both in origin and content. As far as we know, the 4 airplanes that crashed on September 11 could have been totally different machines from those that left the airports earlier that morning.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. It seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because they don't really know where to turn. That's the very sad thing. I think there's going to be a lot of very, very traumatized people that has hit them very, very hard.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost
Maneuver from a terrorist's point of view becomes almost mandatory if seen from the opposite side of the chessboard. If the operation was in fact orchestrated by someone within the military, no one would want a 757 to plunge from the sky onto the Pentagon's roof. That would cause a major devastation, cost thousands of lives, and possibly kill generals and even the Secretary of Defense. To justify the claim of having been attacked, all that was needed was a strike on the side wall in a less populated area away from the top brass offices, where the number of casualties would be kept to a minimum. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but the area of the Pentagon that was hit with the strange maneuver not only satisfied all these requisites, but had just been reinforced in order to withstand a terrorist attack.
Exactly where the plane went in was an area that had recently been redeveloped with very heavy blast walls and firewalls. All the outside windows had been equipped with Kevlar coating to guard against blast. This portion of the building that had been remodeled, heavy blast walls put in. And the old portion had already been vacated in preparations of the remodeling effort, and the number of dead is probably considerably less than it would have been if this part of the Pentagon had been up to full staff. Fortunately, too, this is exactly the opposite side of all the critical command centers in the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense's office, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs office, the National Military Command, where some of the most critical military decisions are made. Fortunately, they were all on the other side of the building.
The renovated section had just been reinforced by floor-to-ceiling steel beams that ran through all 5 floors. When the building section collapsed, the structure was held together by the web of 6 by 6 inch steel columns. Between these columns was a Kevlar-like mesh similar to the material in bulletproof vests, which kept masonry from becoming shrapnel in case of an explosion. The suspicion that a strike on this section of the building was expected doesn't rest on the major beefing up of the structure alone. Apparently, the rumor of a strike on the external ring had already been circulating among the top ranks of the military. On September 11, Jim Miklaszewski was the NBC correspondent at the Pentagon.
The first time I heard the word terrorism out of any U.S. official came shortly after the second plane had hit. And I bumped into a U.S. military intelligence official, and I said, look, what have you got? And he said, obviously, this is clearly an act of terrorism. And then he got very close to me and almost silent for a few seconds. And he leaned in and he said, this attack was so well coordinated that if I were you, I would stay off the E-ring where our NBC office was, the outer ring of the Pentagon, the rest of the day, because we're next.
The autopilot relies on a series of sensors all around the aircraft collecting data.
This is Captain Sonia Laxo, a 23-year veteran at American Airlines. She, like other pilots, uses autopilot on every flight. And while it controls
the ailerons, the flaperons, and the spoilers on both wings, the elevator on the tail, and as well as the rudder.
Autopilot isn't autonomous. She's here to explain just what it actually is, how the technology behind autopilot works, and how it helps her and her fellow pilots get you to your destination. Quick note, Laxo flies Boeing aircraft and will be using Boeing terminology, but autopilot works similarly on other commercial aircraft.
The technical name for the autopilot is the Auto Flight Control System, the AFCS.
The AFCS, or autopilot, is just one of an increasing number of automated technologies in the cockpit, many of which are designed to prevent dangerous scenarios. The autopilot system is there to assist pilots, letting them take their hands off the yoke.
The main components of the autopilot system are the autopilot flight director system and the auto throttle system, actually controlled by what we call the mode control panel and the flight management computer, the FMC, which we most of the time just call it the box.
The mode control panel and the box, those are both controlled by the pilots on the flight deck.
By using the mode control panel, the flight management computer, we command that autopilot flight director system and the auto throttle system to perform the climbs, the cruise, the descents, the approach, and in certain circumstances, the actual landing itself.
But the autopilot system extends outside the cockpit.
The autopilot relies on a series of sensors all around the aircraft collecting data.
GPS information, as well as data on airspeed and altitude, are fed back to the computers on board, which use the information to determine if a plane is veering from its preset route.
The computers are always running. I mean, they're very fast speed, so anytime there's any little discrepancy, it's going to make an adjustment to keep that aircraft on that flight profile.
That's the auto part, the system's ability to make those adjustments to maintain level flight along a path without pilot input.
The autopilot's actually controlling the flight controls. So it's going to be the ailerons, the flaperons, and the spoilers on both wings, the elevator on the tail, as well as the rudder.
By adjusting those components, the autopilot is able to move the plane along one of three axes.
We have the longitudinal axes from nose to tail, the lateral from wingtip to wingtip, and then the vertical, which goes straight down the middle of the aircraft. So when the aircraft is rotating on the longitudinal axis, it's using the ailerons, the flaperons, and spoils to do that. And then the lateral axis, that's being using the elevators. And then your rudder will be along the vertical axis.
While autopilot can move the plane itself, it's not doing so without supervision.
The autopilot is a tool. The autopilot doesn't fly the airplane. We fly the airplane through the automation of the autopilot. So while the autopilot is maintaining the wings level, flying the route, the pilot is always monitoring the autopilot.
This relationship can go both ways, however. Certain autopilot systems prevent input from pilots that would, for example, force the plane to turn too sharply or raise the nose at too steep an angle. To understand just how a pilot uses autopilot, let's follow a flight's path, starting at the gate.
Initially at the gate, we download the route into the FMC, the box, so then the autopilot knows what it needs to be following as per the route, and also performance, airspeed, fuel consumption.
The autopilot isn't engaged just yet. Pilots control the takeoff, but they must engage the autopilot above 28,000 feet due to vertical separation requirements. Though most pilots press the button sooner, letting the autopilot take control.
Analogy would be the cruise control in your car. So it assists the driver, but the driver still has to be aware of their environment and react to that environment. Just like on the flight deck, we can disconnect the autopilot at any and all time and have full control of the aircraft.
But that isn't common. Pilots typically spend only a few minutes per trip manually flying the plane. Though they are required to do regular proficiency checks in a flight simulator, during which certain segments of the flight must be hand-flown. Certain autopilot systems prevent input from pilots that would, for example, force the plane to turn too sharply or raise the nose at too steep an angle.
It has become a theme at this point that often the spell is just getting you to believe something that makes no logical sense. And in this case, it's simply not possible for those planes to fly that fast, especially at that altitude, without disintegrating. And even if they could, both the autopilot and backup autopilot systems would prevent it. I wrote the phrase, "It's just not possible to fly that fast at that altitude," into ChatGPT, and it began to defend the narrative of September 11 to me, without having any context of my statement.
7 stories down, bedrock was finally reached. Foundations for the towers could now be prepared. Concrete footings were formed and poured into bedrock. Massive assemblies of steel beams called grillages were laid on these footings. Each grillage would anchor one of the load-bearing tower columns. Meanwhile, orders were placed for the 200,000 tons of steel which would be needed for construction. Individual pieces were prefabricated and rarely interchangeable. Moreover, there would be no room to stockpile materials at the construction site. This created a tremendous logistical problem. Steel sections would have to arrive at the site in the exact order and at the exact time needed. To meet this challenge, Port Authority engineers used a computerized system known as critical path method. In August 1968, actual steel construction began. Kangaroo cranes, imported from Australia, were used for the first time in the United States. The cranes were assembled on top of the core columns. Each could lift 60 tons at a time. They would be the driving force behind the tower's construction. The cranes have the ability to jack themselves up 36 feet at a jump. As the walls grew to the height of a crane, the crane would hoist itself up, a neighboring crane would swing core columns into place beneath it, and construction would continue. "70 feet up at street level, steel trees were put into place around the perimeter of the towers. These trees would transfer the load of the exterior wall to the more widely spaced columns now anchored to bedrock. Construction of the towers could now proceed with great speed. 3 basic elements were used: 2 or 3 story high sections for the load-bearing wall, massive steel beams for the core columns, and floor sections to span the 60 feet between core and wall. Through the complex orchestration of these structural elements, 3 floors could be constructed in 10 days.
If you take a careful look at the flight paths of American Airlines 11 and UA-175, the 2 flights that took off from Boston's Logan Airport and crashed into the Twin Towers, you'll find a major clue. Not only did both these planes cross paths directly over Stewart Air Force Base, but they did so at the exact same time. Called the Flight Termination System, or FTS. This is a system used to destroy target drones, craft that would be fired on by test aircraft or weaponry, in the event of malfunctions or misses. This highly sophisticated wargame technology allows the control of several drones from a remote location on varying frequencies and has a range of several hundred miles. This technology can be used on many different types of aircraft, including large passenger jets. According to the SPC website, a recent customer at that time was Eglin Air Force Base, located in Florida. Eglin is very near another Air Force base in Florida, MacDill Air Force Base, where Dov Zakheim contracted to send at least 32 Boeing 767 aircraft as part of the Boeing-Pentagon tanker lease agreement. As the events of September 11, 2001 occurred, little was mentioned about these strange coincidences and the proximity of Dov Zakheim and his group. Since there was little physical evidence remaining after the events, investigators were only left with photographic and anecdotal evidence. This is a photograph of the Flight Termination System module from their site. Note it has a cylindrical shape and is consistent with the size and shape of the object observed under the fuselage of Flight 175. The Boeing lease deal involved the replacement of the aging KC-135 tanker fleet with these smaller, more efficient Boeing 767s, which were to be leased by Dov Zakheim's group. The planes were to be refitted with refueling equipment, including lines and nozzle assemblies. In this enlargement of Flight 175, we can clearly see a cylindrical object under the fuselage and a structure that appears to be attached to the right underside of the rear fuselage section. When seen in comparison, it is obvious that the plane approaching the Trade Center has both these structures, the FTS module, and the mid-air refueling equipment, as configured on the modified Boeing 767 tankers. Of particular interest is the long tube-like anomalous structure under the rear fuselage area of 175. This structure runs along the right rear bottom of the plane. The equipment attached to the underside of the plane which hit the World Trade Center is identical in every single way to the Boeing 767s issued by Dov Zakheim.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Bring it back.
The video you're watching now came from Loose Change First Edition.
Did you catch that?
It appears to show the FTS pod self-destructing just before impact.
Also, notice that the flash is reflected in the fuselage of the plane. The flash is also present in footage taken by Evan Fairbanks, Jennifer Spell, and CNN.
One of the things that jumped out at me when I looked at the footage of the video of Flight 175 as it went into the World Trade Center is it appeared to me that there was something on the under fuselage of that aircraft that did not belong there, at least not with a commercial airliner. Now, I'll tell you where I have seen attachments that look like that on military aircraft. So the question you have to answer now is, was that the commercial airliner that hit the World Trade Center, or possibly was it an aircraft that looked very similar but was a military type airplane?
All the recorded sources, all the different photographic evidence that was produced by CNN and ABC, they all show this pod. It's there. You can see it with your own eyes. And in my professional opinion, that there was a pod attached to the bottom of that aircraft, and therefore it was not United Airlines Flight 175.
So what happened in the North Tower? Ask Willie Rodriguez. Willie, a janitor who worked in the World Trade Center for 20 years, was in sub-level 1 when the North Tower was hit.
And all of a sudden we hear boom! I thought it was a generator that blew up on the basement. And I said to myself, oh my God, I think it's a generator. And I was going to verbalize it. When I finished saying that in my mind, I hear boom! Right on the top, pretty far away. So it was a difference between coming from the basement and coming from the top. And everybody started screaming. And a person comes running into the office saying, explosion, explosion, explosion. He got his hand extended, and all the skin was pulled from his under his arm, all the way to the top of the fingertips, and it was hanging on both arms. Hanging and hanging. And then I look at his face, and he was missing parts on his face. And I said, what happened? What happened? And he said, the elevators, the elevators.
Sights and sounds that I heard on that day. The thing that got me suspicious was when I saw the replay of everything the next week and the week after, they took the explosions out. That's how I knew something was up. And the detonations that took both buildings down were exactly identical. First, it started off with about, I'm just guessing, 6 or 7 seconds of this very low frequency rumble, and then the detonation started, and they went boom, boom, boom. They were a little less than a second apart. And the second tower, number one, the second tower collapsed. It was the exact same series of detonations, to the T, the exact same series of detonations. And I just stood there, I didn't move, and I got to feel and hear the whole thing. And I can tell you that the air pressure changed. It was like all of a sudden being like in a submarine 300 feet below the surface.
And I can still remember hearing, first of all, this boom, boom, boom explosion.
As the first tower came down, there were a series of explosions. It was like boom, boom. You could hear the echoes of the
building falls. Explosion. I'm going to show you this 3 times. The first time is actual speed. Take note of the yellow box, which demonstrates severe white flashes given the poor quality of video. In the second instance, which is played at half the speed, notice that after the initial blast, the sunlit side of the building, or the left side, demonstrates the succession of detonations. In particular, right after the first 3 floors are blown up, they missed 1 or 2 floors, as you can see the blast coming out of the building independent of the previous floors. I'm replaying this clip of the people falling because it actually shows white smoke floating along the bottom of the screen. This white smoke is the result of one of the explosions going off in the building. There are no clouds on the ground, so why is there white smoke? The latter images show just how much thermite explosions were involved by the copious amount of white smoke. There is no mistaking the white smoke from carbon combustion explosions. The white smoke is screaming proof that an inordinate number of thermite bombs went off in sync with the plane hitting Tower 2. It was by design. What you see here is a diagram I made of Tower 2, which shows the eyewitness reports of explosions on particular floors before Tower 2 was obliterated. These are not all of them, only the ones reported by those who survived. What a person has to wrap their head around here is how gruesome 9/11 really was. The perpetrators made sure that the plane that hit Tower 1 prevented the 1,366 people trapped above from escaping, while they proceeded to blow up core columns with thermite inside. It was like a meat grinder for the people that managed to survive the fires, smoke, and explosions. Stairwell A was the only means of escape in Tower 2 before the tower's destruction by extremely powerful bombs. 23 people made it out alive from above the point of incident. 600 people died. 343 of New York's finest firemen died in the attacks.
So Marvin Bush, George Bush's brother, Marvin was working at a security company called StrataSec with this guy, Barry McDaniel, who, in his own words, said he was in charge of what he called a completion contract to provide services up until the day the buildings fell down. Okay, so the security company, StrataSec, which was working as a security detail for the Twin Towers, was also working security detail for United Airlines, which flights 93 and 175 were United Airlines flights, as well as the Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C., which is where one of the other airlines, one of the American airlines took off that supposedly hit the Pentagon. And it just keeps getting better because they also contracted for Los Alamos National Laboratories, which, if I had to place a bet on where I think the nanothermite was developed, it would be Los Alamos. And then this company, StrataSec, which had been around since the late 80s and had just went public in 1997 but was a thinly traded stock, their stock price doubled right after 9/11 because so many more companies were looking for security. They're like, oh shit, we have to run from terrorist attacks, we better invest in security firms. But was StrataSec a good investment? No. It ended up basically dissolving in 2002, completely going bankrupt before 2004. It was almost like this company had fulfilled its purpose. And if all of that wasn't fishy enough for you, just wait for this one. The director of StrataSec, this guy Dexter Walker III, was also the chairman of Eigerhawk, which is an investment firm that made a shit ton of money by putting shorts on United Airlines just days before the towers went down. Funny how the director of the security company for the Twin Towers happened to also work at a bank that made money off of shorting one of the only two companies that got absolutely fucked because of the Twin Towers going down and, being hijacked. Never forget, and remember that as the government grows, so does the shadow of tyranny.